Hello and welcome to another episode of Dogman Sasquatch Oklahoma Encounters. My name's Lance Hightower, one of the Cryptid Brothers, coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's so great to be with you guys again. There's so much to tell. We have been out all over the state investigating. It's been a while, so I do apologize in getting back with you guys. We've been doing a lot of computer website stuff, getting ready for a new website for you guys. I can't wait to tell you. And just doing some different things that some of you have requested to improve some of the things that we wanted to. And we just wanted to kick off 2018. We're so thankful for you guys and your commitment in listening to us and your kind words and your comments. We appreciate each and every one of you that is a subscriber. So, and we want to thank again Wes Skirman with Sasquatch Chronicles, helping promote our show. Thank you so much, buddy. We really appreciate that. And from the brothers and Wally Dave, we all appreciate your listening and your support. So we're going to forego our recognition of the subbers, and we're going to start off our first show of 2018 with a doozy here. I have been on pins and needles waiting to tell you this, and I decided to wait on this story until our first episode of January. And this is going to be very, very much like the Ohio Bigfoot attack and Fed cover-up. This came to me kind of hot off the press, if you will, from a gentleman I was in contact with way before this story ever broke until he found out about it. And I want to thank him right now. I wish I could give his name. He does not want me to give his name. He was going to tell the story himself. But I'll back up here just a little bit and tell you why. This gentleman called me back late last summer and had some interesting things going on in his property. He's in Central Florida. He's in a bedroom community about 17 miles from a very, very small town in Florida. And the bedroom community, when I say that, it's really only about 4 or 5 neighbors. That's it in his neighborhood. So it is tiny. It is very beautiful where he lives in Central Florida. But everything is relatively quiet. You know, nothing ever goes on. But over the last year, he's lived there a few years, and nothing's ever happened. Nothing strange has occurred. Just normal life, if you will. And everybody just taking care of their families and working, etc. And probably at the summer, he said, Lance, he called in the toll-free number and he said, there's been some strange things going on. I've got things hitting my trailer. I'm finding some weird footprints. I've had pine cones being thrown at the house late at night. He didn't have any window coverings on the windows, and he decided to cover the windows up one night, and then he had a rock thrown through his patio door, and it busted the glass. And there's nobody out there. He said, Lance, I don't know what else it could be. He goes, it could be some kids. He goes, but we're so far out. We're 17 miles out in the country. The likelihood of that happening is very unlikely. He said, we're getting some weird sounds. He said, I put up some motion light detectors on the corner, and things have settled down. He came out the next day after putting the motion light up on a corner, and it was turned up. And so he surmised it. He's got some Bigfoot activity. And he really didn't share so much of that with some of the neighbors, but he kind of got a feel here and there when to talk to them about it. And his neighbor across the street, just about 50, 60 yards across the street from him, she really doesn't believe in that. She ranks Bigfoot up there with the Easter Bunny. And her and her husband are retired. And so she says, oh, that's a bunch of hocus pocus. So he didn't share any more. But this gentleman, and I'll just call him my source since he didn't want to give his name, he basically said that he sent me some audio, he sent me pictures, and the audio he sent me was amazing. He sent me some audio that was actually from another neighbor about 3/4 of a mile away from where he lives, and it is about 7 minutes of howling of a Bigfoot, of wailing. It's incredible. It really is. And it was about 15 minutes of this, he said, that was going on. And in the transfer of the information to me, we lost about 8 minutes of it, he said. And so he was only able to give me 7 minutes of this 15-minute ongoing wailing and howling. It's just incredible. And we're actually going to have that sound on the intro of our website every time. But so we stayed in communication. He gave me these sounds, which I really appreciated. And he always would call, see how I'm doing. I would call him to see how he's doing and with what's going on. And he basically had some questions regarding episode 24 of the cousins that were attacked in the cover-up. And, I would talk to him about some things and why. And so he was kind of aware of a lot of things. And as he was asking questions and becoming self-enthused and listening to the websites and some of these YouTube radio shows. So that's kind of how we became to know each other. And he was going to give this story in the very beginning. But after listening to episode 24 and what multiple agencies can do to try and shut you up, he got nervous. And he said that I never thought that this would occur right here in my backyard, Lance. I'm just not going to do it. I don't care if you narrate it, but I really don't want anyone to recognize my voice. We're only 4 to 5 neighbors here in this bedroom community. And I just don't want anybody to recognize and mess with me. I'm retired, and my wife and we just want to be left alone and in peace. And I said, I understand. I respect that. So, but I can still tell this story. He said, yes, absolutely. So I tape recorded the conversation so I wouldn't lose any minute detail in this story. So this is what we're going to talk about right now. This occurred December 10th is when this story started occurring. So we have a Florida mother that killed a Bigfoot with multiple agency cover-up. And again, this is going to very much reminisce like episode 24, the Ohio Bigfoot attack and cover-up, except in this case, a Bigfoot was killed. And I appreciate this gentleman, again, I'm going to call him my source, for going to the links that he did and seeing some of the things that he saw. He kind of put himself in a little bit of jeopardy. He did not do it for me. He did it. He's a man that's very curious. He has a background in the military, and he's just passionate about helping people. So thank you very, very much for passing the story on. I've waited with bated breath trying to get this out here to you guys. So here we go. So what happened, this occurred late Sunday night about 11:30 p.m. on December 10th of 2017, this past year. My source has a neighbor across the street, again, the disbeliever, and she was out looking for her dog late at night. It wasn't coming in. She normally brings the dog in. So she had a flashlight, and she was walking around just the front of her yard, and she heard some heavy breathing. She turned, and with the light, and as she turned, she saw her light shone upon a creature, very large creature, just about 30 to 40 feet away, that was standing behind a sign that wasn't too far from her front yard. And this sign was about 3 foot off the ground, and at the height of the sign is about 5 feet, and the width of this sign is about 4 feet wide. So she saw this thing had a hand underneath the sign and was kind of gripping it, and the other hand was kind of on top of the sign. Well, she freaked. She saw this thing, and she ran back in the house, and she was telling her husband, who can't hear very well, and so he was just saying, they were arguing, basically. You didn't see anything. You saw a bear. She said, the hell I did. I know what I saw. You just need to, hear what I'm telling you. So basically, she called my source, her neighbor across the street, and she said, come quickly, and bring a gun. So he knew something was up. So he got a gun, he ran across the street, and the neighbor began to tell my source what she had seen in trying to find her dog. And he said, She said, I'm sorry, I doubted you. I didn't think these things were real. I saw it. And he goes, it's okay, just calm down. So she calmed down a little bit, and he said, let's go find your dog. So there was a shed out back of her house, and they looked in the shed, and in the shed there was a workbench, and under the workbench was that dog. He was way back in the corner. So he wouldn't come out, so my source grabbed the collar of this dog and pulled it out. Reluctantly, the dog finally came out. They brought the dog in the neighbor's house, and she was still kind of frantic. The husband was arguing with his wife. You didn't see anything but a damn bear. And she said, I did not. And so they were going back and forth. And so my source was trying to calm both of them down. And finally, after a while, they calmed down. Well, he was going to see himself out the door, and she was walking him out the door about 12:45 a.m. And as they were walking out the door, a sheriff's car sped past with lights on. And then a game warden, Florida game warden car, or an SUV truck, sped past as well with lights on. And they saw that they were down at the end they went down to the end of the street about 150 yards to a neighbor's house that just moved in. We'll call them the new neighbor. They moved in about 4 months ago. It was a single mother with 3 girls. And that these 2 cars with lights on went down. And my source and his neighbor from across the street looked at each other and said, let's go down and see what's going on. So as they were walking out her door and opening her gate to go down the street, 2 more cars went by. A sheriff SUV car with lights on and a Florida game warden, another truck went by. So now there's 4 cars down there with lights on. So as they were walking down to the new neighbor's house, my source said as he approached one of the sheriff's cars, he saw the mother. He recognized the mother, and she was in the back seat, and she was handcuffed. And he's thinking to himself, what the hell's going on? So he walked up. He saw a game warden on the porch talking to the girls, or one of the middle girls. And so he approached the game warden and with his neighbor, and he said, excuse me, sir, what's going on here? He goes, and the game warden said, who are you? He said, well, we're the neighbors down the street, and nothing ever goes on like this around here. So what's going on, if I may ask? He said, well, this mother discharged a firearm unlawfully and shot a bear. And he said, really? About that time, that middle-aged girl that was in grade school said, no, mommy shot a monster. Mommy shot a monster. And the game warden looked down at her and he said, you need to go inside the house with your sisters. So my source and his neighbor from across the street both looked at each other, kind of, So the game warden said, there's nothing to see here, sir. You need to go back home. So they turned away, walked back to their homes. And my source saw his neighbor off at her house, and he walked back across the street to his. After about 10 minutes or so, he waited, and the 4 of the cars, the 2 game warden trucks and the 2 sheriff SUV cars drove past, and there was nobody there at the new neighbor's place, but he knew that the girls were still there, so he walked back down the street, knocked on the door, and basically said, girls, I'm sure you're shook up. Do you just want to come stay with me and my wife? You stay the night, and we'll feed you breakfast in the morning, and then you can leave. So the girls said, yes, we want to go, yes. So he got the girls, and they all went back down to his house where his wife and him live, and they basically stayed the night there. So then, as they got into his house, as he was kind of feeding the girls as they were bedding down, and one of the girls said, Mommy didn't shoot a bear. She shot a monster. It was a monster. My source was just kind of, I wonder if it was a Bigfoot, is what he was kind of asking himself. He still didn't know the specifics of what was going on. And so once the girls were settling down and they were getting ready to go to bed, my source decided to sneak out his back door of his house, kind of in the dark, and he walked around to the back side of the property of the new neighbor's house. Again, it was about 150 yards. He walked in the woods, walked down, and came from and approached the back side of the property to about 40 feet from her trailer. And what he did is he squatted down in the tree line, which was only about 10, probably, actually he said about 15 feet 20 feet into the tree line, which was still about 40 feet from her trailer. So if you can imagine what he was telling me, there's about 15 feet to 20 feet of trees, and then it is a mowed area. It's clear, and then it's her trailer. So as he squatted down in the wood line there, he was trying to get a good position, but where no one could see him, he thought, I'm just going to sit right here, if someone, just see what goes on. And he couldn't see much because it was dark, but he could see that she had a night light out in front of her house, but it cast a shadow to the back of her trailer. So he was squatted down, he got behind a tree, and he just kind of stuck his head out, and he was just kind of watching and waiting. And within a few minutes of just squatting down, he said, here comes a game warden truck. He could tell, and I asked him, how can you tell? And he said it had the emblem right on the door, Florida Game Wildlife Department, and it had their emblem right there. He said it was a quad cab, and it had like a short bed in it. Truck is what it was, and it backed in. And then there was two other trucks that came that just pulled in with their lights, and then they shut their lights off. And the quad cab, all three of the trucks were Florida wildlife game trucks, and the quad cab that backed in was shining lights. It had its reverse lights, and he says when it had those lights, I could see clearly then that there was a body laying on that cleared area, that mowed area back behind her house right there. And it was you could see that the feet were sticking up, and he said you could clearly see the arms, and it was sprawled out right on the ground. He said, I asked him, I said, what could you tell size? He said, you can just tell it was big. He said, at least from the ground to the chest area that I could gauge, it was at least 2.5 to 3 foot thick, at least. He said that truck pulled in with probably about 10 feet from that Bigfoot, and it stopped. They turned off the trucks, and out of the quad cab, 3 game wardens got out. And I asked him, I said, how do you know it was a game warden? He says, well, they were all wearing the same uniform. There was the quad cab that backed up, had 3 guys get out. They all had the same uniform, and they had the game warden badge. And then out of the other 2 game warden trucks was a single game warden that got out of those trucks. So there was a total of 5 of them. And they all were wearing the uniform and had the guns on the side and everything. He said they had flashlights, and they had flashlights down on the Bigfoot, and they were looking at it. He said they were saying something, but I couldn't quite hear what they were saying because everything was kind of like almost like a whisper. You could hear them talking, but I couldn't discern what they were saying. And so one of the game wardens opened the tailgate to the quad cab truck, and he had one of those rollaway. He said, Lance, it's one of those rollaway. It's like it locks in. It goes in tracks. It can, so you don't have your stuff stolen out of the back of the truck bed, and it's on a track. And it basically locks your stuff up that's in the back of your bed of your truck. I said, oh, I think I know. And he said he pushed it open. He slid it open. And then he got back down. And then they started to lift this Bigfoot. And I said, did they have a net? What it looked like? He said, they just were manhandling it. He said they had an arm, they had the legs, and one guy had like the head. And he said, you can tell they were struggling. When they tried to lift it up, they were struggling. They almost dropped it. And you could tell they were straining. And then finally what they did is they loaded it head first on its back. And then they pushed it up in the truck bed. And one guy was up in the truck bed, and they grabbed onto the arms and they pulled it up as the others were on the ground pushing kind of the legs and feet. And they finally got it loaded, and they pushed the feet in and kind of bent a little bit at the knee, and they shut the truck bed. And then the 2 guys got out, and then they took the truck liner that's in that lock-away liner, they rolled it, and then they locked it. So you couldn't see anything from the top. It's just locked in. And everybody got in their respective trucks, and they left. And he said they were there, and got their business done. They were in and out within less than 15 minutes. So he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He just couldn't believe it. And so he got up. My source got up. He walked back through the woods and came in the back side of his property and went back into his home. And that was it at that point in time. The girls were sleeping. Everybody was asleep at his house. And so at that point in time, he went to bed. The next morning, well, earlier that day, so that was Sunday, early, Sunday's when this started, and that was already, when he was watching these game wardens, that was already early in the morning of Monday, December 11th. So what he did, he got up, the girls got up relatively early that morning. Two of the girls had to go to school. School was still in session, and so he fed them, and the girls walked over to their place to get ready for school, and the oldest was helping the sisters. And so they left back to their house, and within about 7 to 10 minutes, my source said he gets a knock at his door, and this was about 9 a.m., again on Monday, December 11th. He gets a knock on the door about 9. He answers, and there was two guys standing at the doorstep, and one guy was in a black suit, clean cut, and the other guy was kind of dressed casual with a light, scruffy beard. A little bit larger than the clean-cut guy in the suit. And he noticed they had pulled up in a black car, and they really didn't introduce themselves at all. They just said, "Good morning. We heard that you and your neighbors were down the street last night at the neighbor's house." He said, "Yeah, we were down there because nothing like this ever happens around here, and we wanted to know what was going on. And it's typically dead around here, so we were just curious what was happening." So this, we'll call this guy the Men in Black guy, because he was kind of in a black car and he was in a black suit. He said, "Do you know what happened?" And my source said, "Well, all I know is that a woman discharged a gun and supposedly shot a bear." And the Men in Black guy said, "Yes, that's what we were told too." And he said, have you heard of anything else that was said?" And my source thought, this is interesting. But he was just thinking this. He said, "No, nothing else that I'm aware of." And he said, "Well, if we want to get in touch with you, how do we contact you, sir?" And my source said, "Well, I'll be right here. I ain't going nowhere. I've been here a long time." So that was all that was said, and they got back into their car. And as they were pulling away, my source said he noticed that it had government tags. And then they just left, and they didn't go to anyone's home. They were just at his home that they noticed, and they left down the street. So later that day, my source said that he had to go to the store to get some groceries for him and his wife. And he was stopped while he was going to the grocery store. He was pulled over by a local deputy sheriff while driving into town. And he always drives the speed limit, he said. He goes, "I never break the speed limit law." He goes, "What?" He goes, "I'm driving the speed limit way under. It's like, 35 miles an hour. I'm doing 30. And then he gets pulled over. And he knew he hadn't been speeding. And so when he got pulled over, the deputy came up to the window and he said, "Why did you pull me over? I wasn't speeding." And the deputy said, "Yes, you're right, but I pulled you over because you have a back light out." And so my source got and walked around the back of his car, and he said, "Where? I don't have any lights out." He's thinking tail lights. He said, "Both of my tail lights work." He said, "No." The deputy said, "Right there. You have a light out over your license plate." Well, there was two little bulbs that light up the license plate. One was on and one was out. And my source said, "That's a tiny light bulb. One is still on. I still have one that's still lit." And the deputy said, "You'll still have to get that fixed, sir." So my source got back into the car and kind of held his tongue. He said, "Thank you, sir. Have a nice day. I appreciate it. I'll get it fixed." And he went on to the grocery store. And he's thinking to himself, what the hell? There's something's not jiving here. And so he got his grocery shopping done, and he put the groceries in. And as he was driving away from the grocery store, he noticed immediately that he was being followed by a sheriff's car in an SUV. And the sheriff literally tailgated him all through town and all the way back to his home 17 miles away. He said, Lance, he was so close. He was like 6 feet at some times from my back bumper. If I would have barely touched my brake, he would have rammed me. He said, after a while, it was starting to really piss me off. He said, I thought, honestly, he was going to hit me a few times. I almost stopped and just said, what the hell are you doing? He goes, but I held my tongue. I didn't say anything. I didn't give any hand gestures. I just kind of looked straight ahead as if he was not back there the whole time. But obviously, at this point now being pulled over, now I'm being tailgated by a sheriff. This has got to be some type of intimidation tactic or something. I don't know what they're up to. They must think I know something that I'm not supposed to. I don't know, but this is absurd. So they must think I know something. So they tailgated, this deputy sheriff tailgated me, he said, all the way to my house. I pulled into my drive, and then he just kept going straight. He never stopped. He just kept going straight and kept going on. Never said anything, just kept going straight. And I thought, they must think I know something about this Bigfoot killing. They don't know what I know, but they're just trying to see, and if I'll crack or break, I don't know. This is bizarre. So this sheriff's car went straight on, never pulled away. So that was Monday, December 11th. Now Tuesday, December 12th. And again, my source was just telling me day by day what was going on. He had called me and said, Lance, this is what happened yesterday. Lance, this is what happened again later today. So I was documenting all this as he was calling me. So this is Tuesday, December 12th, 2017. He said, it's morning time. It's about 9:30. And my source had a knock at the door. And he opened the door, and there were 2 guys, different guys, than the day before that knocked on his door that had government tags. And these 2 guys were driving a black Lincoln-like car, like some type of Crown Victoria or Lincoln, and it too had government tags. Now these guys were different. They were both pretty clean cut, about the same height, average height. They were not in suits. They were just kind of casually dressed, and they basically asked my source what the first 2 guys had asked the day before. And my source said, well, as far as I'm aware of, the neighbor lady down the street discharged a gun and shot a bear illegally. And one of the guys said, well, are you sure that's all you heard? And my source said, yes, that's what I told the other 2 guys that I spoke to yesterday that was here. So they left. These 2 guys got back into their car, turned around, and again, he noticed that they had government tags as well and drove off. And they were only there for about 5 minutes or so, he said. They didn't drive to any other neighbor homes that he could tell. They may have, but they didn't drive anywhere else after they left his driveway. They went on. And he told me, when I asked him, I said, what do you think they're there? And he says, well, I think they're visiting me twice because they knew that the girls stayed the night with him and his wife, and they were trying to see how much information that the girls divulged to him about what had occurred about their mother shooting a Bigfoot. I'm sure that's what it was. And I concurred after, discussing this with him. So he said later that day in the afternoon, my source got a call from a neighbor, a buddy of his, and we'll call his neighbor, Neighbor 1. Neighbor 1 owns quite a bit of property in that area, and he couldn't find one of his dogs and was wanting to know if my source would go with him and help him. And my source said, of course, yeah, give me a second. Let me get things tied up here and I'll help you. And also, this neighbor guy contacted another neighbor, and we'll call him neighbor number 2, who also owns property that abuts up against neighbor 1's property. Neighbor 1 has quite a bit, like 120 acres. Neighbor 2 has about like 30 acres, but they abut up against each other's property. So neighbor 1 said, hey, you want to come with us? I'm going to look for my dog. Neighbor 2 said, yeah, I'll go with you guys. So my source also knew neighbor 1 didn't have a gun, so he brought a gun for him, and he had a gun. So, he says, anytime you go anywhere, everybody needs to carry a gun. So he said, we went. So all 3 of these neighbors, which included my source, set out to walk on neighbor 1's property looking for neighbor 1's dog. And all this property was behind neighbor 1's house. The entrance to the property actually is very close to neighbor one's house, and he has about 120 acres, like I said, and that's the gate to get in and get out. My source said no sooner had they begun to walk onto the neighbor's woods, only about 50 to 60 yards in the woods as they were walking, and they heard something at first, and then they turned and they saw, all three of them saw military soldiers with firearms walking slowly in neighbor one's woods. And my source said that there was about 10 soldiers. They were in fatigues, and they had their helmets on, and they were all carrying AR-15s. And I said, how do you know they were AR-15s? He said, well, I've been in the military. I have military experience. I know what things are. He said that neighbor one approached one of the soldiers who was kind of breaking away from the group to approach him. And neighbor one said, what are you guys doing on my property? Because neighbor one has his property posted everywhere. No hunting, no fishing. Because all of the livestock he has around his property, he doesn't want anyone to come in there and mess with his livestock or his land. And the soldier came forward, was a sergeant. And he said, and he could tell from the patch, it was a sergeant, and he said, we're conducting a military exercise, sir. And neighbor one said, not on my property. No one gave anybody authority to do that. And the sergeant said, we can go anywhere we want, sir. And neighbor one said, who's in charge here? So the sergeant said, my lieutenant, who was up a little ways and came walking forward to neighbor one. He can see that he was talking to the sergeant. And he stepped up. And this lieutenant was a young guy. My source said he was probably about somewhere around 24, 25 in age. And he basically said he was a kind of a cocky ass is what he said. And he spoke to my neighbor and said, he looked at neighbor one and he said, you either get off the property now or we'll have to remove you from the property immediately. Then neighbor one said, who is your commander? And the lieutenant didn't say a word. He said, we will remove you if you do not leave now, sir. Now, what was very interesting, my source said, is that while they were talking to this military personnel, standing there about 50 or 60 feet into neighbor one's wood line, some of the military, there was a military-like helicopter flying overhead and through neighbor one's woods. He states that it was like a two-seater type of small helo that was all black with the open doors, and that there were no numbers or letters, no identification on the side of this helicopter, but it had a large black dome under the belly of the helo. And my source said it reminded him back when he was in the military like a heat-seeking or thermal detection device. It's like a big bulb mounted on the bottom, and it too was kind of like a tinted black. He said, I'm sure of it. I'm sure that it was some type of a thermal device, heat-seeking device. With my military experience, that's what we used to have too. And he said they were flying all over the property when they were talking to this sergeant and lieutenant. So they agreed that the military was in some type of operation of locating, eliminating, and extracting any remaining Bigfoots in the area on neighbor one's property. And that my source said to neighbor one, he said, let's just go. Let's just go. I'll tell you about what's going on. So they left, walking back to neighbor one's home. And neighbor one said, I don't know how the hell they got onto my property when the main entrance is right by my house. And my source said, I guarantee you that they're coming in somewhere on the back side of the property through that abandoned state park area. Behind neighbor one and behind partly of neighbor two's property is an abandoned state park that's been fenced in and gated in. It's absolutely off to the public. There's nobody going in. It's been closed off to the public for a long time, my source says. He said, I bet you they're coming through your property through that abandoned state park, through the back way or something. So when they got up back to neighbor one's house, my source asked neighbor two if he could walk to the back of his property to take a closer look and see if he could see anything fishy, what was going on. And neighbor two said, sure. So my source took off slowly, walking carefully, staying out of the line of sight, walking near a high dirt embankment, which was about, he said, around 18 feet in height, while being concealed in the swamp weeds. He said that he walked all the way to the far east end of neighbor two's property, as far away as to not be seen by anyone, if there was anyone back there. On top of this 8-foot embankment, he said that there was a wooden fence with about 4x4 posts and 1x6s across the top, and it was white. As soon as he reached the back end of neighbor two's property, he waited for about, he said, 20 to 30 minutes by laying down in the weeds and just kind of waiting. And no sooner than about that 20 to 30 minutes, and there was 2 vehicles that pulled through a fenced gate from the abandoned state park, which adjoined neighbor one's property. One vehicle was black Econo van, he said, with not many windows, but it did have some small windows in the back that were tinted. But the window where the driver and passenger was at was not tinted. And the other vehicle that followed was a black SUV with dark tinted windows all the way around. So my source knew, he said, he goes, this is where they're coming into neighbor one's property right here. I knew it. Then he went back to call neighbor one and where they had come in at. And as he was speaking to neighbor one over the land phone, they both agreed to hang up and talk over their cell phones instead. So my source said they discussed that if anybody could be listening on their landlines, it would be more challenging and they thought difficult to do cell phones. So they hung up and they called back and spoke on their cell phones to discuss the matter, what was going on the back of neighbor one's property. And so that ended Tuesday, December 12th events. So Wednesday, December 13th, 2017, my source gets a call from neighbor 2 and said that late last night that it sounded like a war zone at the back of his property. My source said that he didn't hear anything, probably because he can't hear much when the doors and the windows are shut. And he also asked neighbor 1 if he had heard anything, and he said no. But he thought that very, very strange that he heard all these guns going off late at night. Pow, 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 pow. And so later, my source said that later that morning, he saw the oldest daughter walking down the road taking her little sisters to the bus stop. And my source asked the daughter, he decided to go down there. He said, "How's everything going, hon?" And the girl said, "I don't want to talk about it. My mother said that I'm not supposed to talk about what happened." My source said, okay, no problem. I understand, but how's your mother doing?" And the daughter said, she's doing okay. She's home sleeping right now. I asked him who he thought may have spoken to the girls and why they seemed a little anxious, because they appeared that way when my source was telling me. And he said, well, I'm sure the mother definitely talked to them, but who talked to her? Most likely the guys in black, he said. My source said that the oldest daughter was trying to get her mom out of jail and needed some assistance later that day. So my source helped the oldest daughter in getting the mother released to go back home, which did happen later that day, about 3 to 4 hours later. He said that the oldest daughter did say, though, that they were outside of that night, which would have been Sunday night. They were out playing. All 3 were out playing till about 11 p.m. And then they went back inside. Shortly after, their mother pulled up, and that's when they heard shots from their mother's pistol. They went outside and saw what she had shot. So this is when the oldest daughter went back in the house immediately and called the sheriff's department to tell what their mother had shot. Of course, the girls and the mother did not expect that the mother would be arrested and jailed from this incident. So when my source and I spoke about this is where basically people need to be aware of. The first people that you call is not a sheriff, is not a game warden. And we'll get into who you need to call later here. So let's continue on. I asked how much of a bond that the court set to my source of this mother being jailed, and he said it was a ridiculous amount. It's more than it should have been, Lance. Again, most likely a potential tactic in trying to show how serious they are, they being the men in black, I guess, or this agency, this Fed agency, on wanting things kept quiet and what they can do. I told my source that they most likely took her pistol, and they may have even confiscated her phone, which she won't get back, I'm sure, and we both agreed. And I asked my source, has he seen the mother out and about, being that she's out of jail? And he said, yes, I've seen her. She leaves and then she comes back from work, but hasn't spoken to her. She just goes to work and comes home, goes to work and comes home. Also, later that same day, my source had gone into town later, and so he decided to, before he was going to drive into town, he decided to drive down by the new neighbor, the mother that shot the Bigfoot, to go, there's a loop down there. So he decided to go past her house and loop around, then go back as he was going into town, just to see anything going on at her place, or, just to kind of see what's going on. And so as he drove down the street to the new neighbor's house, as he was driving past the house, just before he did a U-turn, as he drove past, he noticed that in the back of her trailer, there was a black SUV with government plates right there, because they were pulled in and he could easily see the plates. And that there was two men near the back door of her place. One of the guys had a rake, and where the dead Bigfoot was found dead, and where he was not too far away in the woods. We both believe that they were there picking up any remaining evidence of dried blood, collecting any tissue specimens from the shooting, and erasing any evidence or tracks, basically wiping the area clean of any evidence of what transpired during the early hours of that previous Monday. So it was kind of crazy when he told me. I just couldn't believe it, but I could believe it. So they were basically wiping the area clean, checking for any blood smears on the trailer, any evidence, collecting everything, so as if nothing ever occurred. So Thursday came, December 14th. My source contacted me and he said, Lance, there's nothing going on today. Everything seems to be just like it was prior to everything just going crazy on Sunday. He said everything is quiet. There's no black SUVs. There's no one knocking on doors. There's no military. There's nothing. There's no helicopters. It's just quiet now. So we spent hours and hours talking about this and reviewing what happened and why. So in listening to this, I basically said, this is exactly what happened during the Ohio Bigfoot. He said, yeah, I can't believe this, Lance. He said, I never thought in a million years it would occur something like that here. And I said, well, you never know where and you never know when. I said, but the problem that people have is when they contact people of authority thinking they're going to help them. And what happens is they end up being crucified. They end up being sent to jail, ridiculed, embarrassed, threatened, and they did nothing wrong. They thought they were doing something right by contacting the quote-unquote appropriate officials. So after all this, and in speaking to my source, and we still talk on a weekly basis, I thought about this and said, what can anyone learn from this Bigfoot shooting? This obvious local law enforcement, wildlife department, federal department, and military cover-up involving 4 different agencies. This is crazy. There's people that know out there, but they want to cover things up. Why? Well, I think it's quite simple. I think that they want to cover it up because they're afraid it would cause mass panic, and I can see that. I think they want to cover it up because you can have loss of dollars. I think that's the primary loss of revenue. Again, we spoke about this on episode 24, and I've heard this said on Sasquatch Chronicles and Bigfoot Outlaws and Brent and Sawn's show, that can you imagine the billions of dollars that would be lost from people not camping, hunting, hiking, boating, fishing, on and on and on, if there was a relic hominoid creature among the woods, and how people would not go, and then you'd have people go with pitchforks? I mean, there would be such a variety of people that would stay away from the woods and those that would go into the woods. You would have people from PETA wanting to say everything is protected then across the United States. Nothing, you can't hunt anywhere. if these things are out there. So it would cause a mass chaotic Pandora's box, if you will, of lost revenue, of so many federal laws, wildlife laws. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on of potential. There's a really good book out there that I just started. It's been out there for a long time. My brother Bill started getting me on it, and it goes through some scenarios out there. It's called Enoch by Autumn Williams. Very good book. I would read that because in the very beginning, she goes through a potential scenario that I think it could be quite true on what could happen on something like that. So I want to say here in closing just a little bit is, first, if you ever shoot down or kill a Bigfoot or a dogman, or become injured from a Bigfoot or dogman attack, what should you do? Well, first of all, you shouldn't call any law enforcement authorities. Not unless you have a dire emergency, health-related, your life is in jeopardy, or others that are seriously injured. Honestly, so what does that constitute? Well, that's going to be on a person-to-person basis here, but if your life's not in jeopardy and you've, and this is just my opinion, if you were pushed or you have a laceration and you're going to make it, then you really shouldn't, or I wouldn't call the authorities. Why? Because the people who you think, again, that are going to help you, that are going to be the very ones who, as I said before, crucify you and sending you to jail. They will intimidate you, they will coerce you, and tell you to keep your trap shut. Plain and simple. So unfortunately, if these good folks who have the first time encounter and have never listened to any shows like ours and others, they're going to call the local law enforcement or they're going to call the county game warden. Either one is not a smart idea. It's just not. I know that sounds crazy to say, but it's not in this particular circumstances. So what should someone do if they shoot a Bigfoot or a dogman, something, and so how would you know that? It's just going to look different like you've never seen before. It's not a dog, it's not a cow, it's not a mountain lion. You'll know. I'll just say you'll know. And if there's no one injured, who do you call? Call us. Give us a call on our toll-free number, and we'll come and assist you with taking care of what needs to happen. That's all I'll say. But realize there'll have to be some strict confidentiality between us, both on your end and, of course, on our end. If you wish, you don't have to give us your name. On a most recent update from my source, he said that the mother and her girls have recently moved away. The mother said that it was because of her getting married, but we both suspected that it was because of what occurred, that they were afraid to remain there any longer. And they didn't want to be around that area. And I can't blame them one bit, really. Both of us couldn't. So in wrapping this up and in closing here, I really want to give my source a thank you. And that just sharing this bizarre encounter that happened. He couldn't believe it was happening. Every day was something bizarre. He couldn't believe it. It was like a CSI type of movie. He was scared. It was thrilling at first, but then he got scared. He said, I don't want anybody to mess with me, Lance. And I said, well, and he was concerned about people listening to our conversations. And so we delayed the story in getting out for a couple reasons. One, while it was hot, we didn't want anyone that happens to get on these shows to find out who he was. We wanted to let everything die down just a little bit, and I decided to go ahead and hang on to it to start our shows for 2018. That's the reason why. And again, this occurred in Central Florida. He's in a bedroom community. He asked that I not, at this present time, give it because really there's only like 4 or 5 people in this bedroom community. He said it's terribly small, and you would know who I am if I was to give the people or my name in this area. He said that he would, again, love to have done this himself, but after hearing of the events that transpired from episode 24, the cousins that were attacked with the Fed intimidation, the cover-up and everything, he didn't trust that some of the men in black wouldn't try to find him later. And after telling me and airing the story of events, and he really didn't want that at all. He said, I'm retired. I just want to be left alone, in peace, and not bothered, Lance. And I said, I respect that. I'll make sure no one knows who you are. So To everyone that's listening to many of these YouTube radio shows, what we can all learn is straightforward and to the point. Don't trust any law enforcement or game department agencies if you tell them anything regarding a Bigfoot story, a Bigfoot or a dogman shooting that occurred. Just don't say anything. And again, if you have shot some creature that you know isn't human and it's not anything that you've ever seen before, give us a call and we can ease your worries. We can. We've already helped many folks across the state and outside of the state, and we can help you as well. So thanks everyone for listening to yet another cryptid encounter and ensuing cover-up. We feel very honored to be receiving such amazing stories from you, our listeners, who are really the courageous ones, who have experienced something so terrifying, yet you're still brave enough to share with us, that we can share to you guys. So thank you guys so very much. Again, we feel blessed that we could help this gentleman share what had happened. So many of you that are just out there that have had very similar encounters can share what happened to you so others can feel you're not alone. Because there are literally thousands of people, in our opinion, that have had very similar circumstances and encounters and stories just like this that really happened. They really happened. And I know they're so far-fetched that many people will say, that can't happen, that didn't happen. I'm telling you right now, folks, it did. And it has occurred all the time. It occurs every month somewhere in the United States, and there's just a handful of people that'll speak up. So we appreciate this gentleman, my source. I talk to him on a continuous basis. I still talk to the gentleman in Ohio on a continuous basis. We're good friends, and it's about relationships. It's about trust, and they trust me and I trust them. So to everyone out there, stay safe. Stay safe when you're going out investigating. Take care of each other, never go alone, and always stay alert. We are Cryptid Brothers Investigation of Oklahoma. Take care, everybody.